What? Damn, bro. Keith Frank being your boy, bud.
I'm
Does
just
my nose look like Ric Flair's nose?
We are the National Wrestling Clipping Alliance.
Don't look at the camera. What? I'm getting flustered.
You're gonna get one of these, bud. I'm Jess.
I'm Wes.
And we're back, baby. We are the National Wrestling Clipping Alliance, and you are watching the NWCA Podcast, the only wrestling podcast in the world that doesn't just talk wrestling history. We show history. Wes, it's been a while to try to start this up tonight, but we're finally good to go, and it's going to be a big night.
We're really excited about this, Jesse, because we're going to be putting this out on International Podcast Day, which I think is September the 30th in my notes. And we're going to have a good show. It's going to be fun. And technical difficulties aside, we are marching on, baby. Just carrying on.
Yeah, when we have technical difficulties, we have to pull out the defibrillator because we don't know if Wes is going to have a heart attack. But we're on the roll here. He's got some weird-ass Elton John shirt on. Not a big deal. I'm rocking the New Japan, but let's not get into that. Let's recap. We did London, 1957, London, Ontario, 1957, Whipper Watson versus Gene Kiniski, a topic you and I have covered multiple times on multiple platforms. And then we did Stratford in 1959.
Yes, the Stratford show was just around my birthday, which was cool.
Yeah,
my actual birth date.
Yeah, so you know how old that episode should have been. Cool thing about those two shows is that we've never done London and we didn't do Stratford before, and we're almost on our 50s run. This is a kind of like a bonus episode, like you said, for International Podcast Day. For our next episode, we're going to stay in the 50s and we're going to do Toronto before we head to Dallas and talk Dallas in the 60s. And we're doing a big 60s run before my favorite topic, the 90s. But today, we got a lot to talk about. But you wanted to talk about something specific about the CAC, Wes.
Yes, we were lucky enough for Vern May to send us out a couple of magazines, yours in the mail, Jesse. And we were proud to put in our 2 cents worth and sponsor a page actually in the magazine. There we are at the Nasty Boys page, which was pretty cool. You know, we're trying our hardest to get ourselves out there. We're trying our hardest to put our name out and do the best we can. Of course, that doesn't have anything to do with our 5 wrestling Facebook pages, which are growing every week. It's so cool. They're so much fun.
Oh, yeah. Posts every day. Follow us on TikTok. Before we get into our big show today and our topics, we want to remind you we are sponsored by Grand River Tea. Save 15% off your final purchases when using the code NWCA at checkout. Stay healthy by saving money. Organic tea, black tea, green tea. They're going to have some October and fall specials coming up, as well as Christmas specials. So head over to grandrivertea.ca. Check out all their wide variety of premium loose leaf teas. Add them up in your cart. Check out NWCA. Save 15%. Also, Grumpy Bear Vinyls. Grumpy Bear Vinyls is a custom-made apparel and goods store. They got hats, shirts, mugs. Grumpy Bear Vinyls brings your ideas to life. Hit them up on Facebook, Grumpy Bear Vinyls, or email Liz at grumpybearvinyls@gmail.com. And they have our t-shirts and our sweaters. So support the show by rocking our stuff. Wes, let's get into a big show. After all those technical difficulties, everything's out of the way.
Yes.
Who do we got today?
We're lucky enough to be joined by our good friend George Shire from Minnesota, and he's actually in the same time zone as me, which is really cool. We get together every once in a while on other podcasts and talk. I've grown to really enjoy his friendship, and more than that, his extreme knowledge, which is really nice. George, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
I'm excited to be here. I've loved the technical difficulties. It's been great.
George, one thing I wanted to start off with is the Wrestling Fans International Association. Now, you're an advisor to that quad program when it comes out. Do you want to talk about how you got involved in that?
Well, actually, as we sit here right now, I am actually on the board of directors. I
Oh,
got
wow.
got a promotion. The
Oh,
pay's the
there you
same.
go.
The pay's the same, but I got a promotion. The WFIA, I tell you what, if you're an old guy like me and you've been around the wrestling business since the later 60s, and I've been around longer than that, but in 1968, WFIA, Wrestling Fans International Association, was first formed by a guy named Don Wilson in St. Louis, Missouri. And Don had been a promoter and put this fan organization together. And what was so great about it is that a lot of fans today, the modern day fan, they have so much at their fingertips. All they got to do is Google this, Google that. They got everything. They can find something out in a nanosecond. Well, in 1968, we had real telephones that hung on the wall, and we had, we had snail mail. We didn't have email. We didn't have the internet. So we didn't learn about all these things. And when we watched wrestling in our little area on our sometimes still black and white TV with a couple of rabbit ears on top of it, when we watched wrestling, what we saw was what we got. We didn't know about what was happening in another territory around the United States or in another country. And the WFIA brought together people that could have an annual convention, is what it was called. And Don Wilson and his board, they would put together this convention in a particular town, working with a particular promotion. And they would go in there, work with the promotion, have a hotel banquet room, display room. They would have the wrestlers from the promotion come and visit and talk. Now, you got to remember, this was kayfabe in that era.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the wrestlers were in their true form, but they were friendly. They would talk with the fans. And then the bottom line was, it was fan clubs. And if anybody doesn't know what that is, it's a wrestler would come into a territory, someone would start a fan club for him. And that fan club would, provide the results of the wrestler, background info, bios, pictures for their fan club members. So all these fan clubs would come together at the convention. And it was a fantastic way to make friendships. I tell you what, I started going to, my first WFIA was in 1971 in St. Louis. And I met a group of guys there that, here we are 52 years later, and we're still friends. Dave Brzezinski, Tom Burke, to name two of them. But I could go down a long list of people that I met through the years. A lot of them fellow historians, as we've now become, keeping the wacky world of wrestling straight from the way the promoters messed it up with telling us what we didn't know at the time.
Yeah.
And so that's what the WFIA is. Well, long story short, it went through its stages. Don Wilson eventually was gone from it. There was another guy that came in, and he basically ran it into the ground. It was a sad deal. A lot of us who were involved in that old WFIA shed a lot of tears, because the organization was run so smoothly, and the individual that, and I'm not even going to mention his name, it's not worth it, but it was gone. Well, now, most recently, Brad Drake has decided, along with guys like me, Tom Burke, Dave Brzezinski, Jason Monday, a lot of people, I don't have the list in front of me, but they are fantastic. And they brought it back. It's free to join. There's a WFIA page, Wrestling Fans International Wrestling page. Go to it, hit join. It's free. You're going to get the newsletter, the magazine online. And we're looking to have a virtual reunion in 2024.
Wow.
We're not going to be going to a hotel or anything, but we're looking to have a virtual reunion with real wrestlers there and have a big video thing. Hopefully we don't have Wes running it, so we have technical difficulties. Sorry, Wes, I had to do that. And but yeah, it's just a way for fans to connect. And the nice thing about it is that this is where old school is meeting new school. Mm-hmm. Because I'll be honest with you, I don't watch today's product. And honestly, I don't care about it. But I have the utmost respect for the wrestling fans of today that are enjoying their wrestling.
Yeah.
We enjoyed
100%.
ours.
Yep.
And even though the products are different in the way they're presented and the nature of how they're promoted, it's still pro wrestling. And these old brains can come together and share with the younger folks. We can learn history, and that's the key thing. WFIA is history. So that's the nutshell of it. If you have any questions beyond that, I would say go ahead and ask, but I'm excited to be involved in it. It kind of brings back a little bit of the old.
Good. That's cool.
I'm in the group, and I do get the magazine, the newsletter, so I'm pretty happy. But one thing you did say is the snail mail, you didn't have anything. So that brings me to this guy right here. Now, this guy is like one of my heroes. You might know who Terry Justice is.
Terry Justice is. I loved him. Yes, and that was the WFIA connection. Terry Justice and I, and him along with so many others, and myself with others, we traded programs, results, photos, clippings. And I have a lot of stuff in my collection from Terry Justice. For those that don't know, he left us very early, very sad the way he left us.
Yeah.
Was it an automobile accident?
Yes, it was. On a way to an amateur wrestling tournament.
Yes. And this goes back about 20 some years ago, maybe 30. Yeah, I think it was in the later 80s.
TNT times. So,
but his TNT bulletin, and you know, all these fan club bulletins that were out there for particular wrestlers, but there were also bulletins out that were covering a territory, or they were covering results only. Yeah. And it really opened it up for, I mean, it was our internet back in the day. So when I joined, I could get information from all these other people. And some of the fan clubs that were run, plus I had the opportunity, and Tom Burke did as well. We wrote the fan club columns for Wrestling Monthly magazine. No, I'm going to correct that. Wrestling News magazine and Ring Wrestling magazine that were combined at one point by Norman Keatzer, who had Pro Wrestling Enterprises, and he did the Wrestling News magazine. So Tom and I had our fan club columns in the respective issues. And what a fan had to do is, if you ran a fan club, you'd send, in this case, you'd send a copy to me for my review, give us the details of the club. We would, of course, be able to evaluate whether it's, you know, you're ripping somebody off or you've got something that they really need to send their hard-earned dollars in to become a member. And we would plug them in the magazines. And that's the way it worked. And that's what Don Wilson, who originally formed the WFIA, did when he was the fan club editor for Wrestling Review magazine back in the day. But this was a great connection. And Terry Justice, Marilee Nedzil, who ran the Jimmy Valiant Club, Dave Brzezinski ran a club. Tom Burke used to do his Global Wrestling Bulletin.
Yeah, still one of the
great
best ones. Yeah,
great stuff. And even I did a fan club for a while for Ramon Torres, famous Torres brothers, Enrique and Alberto, and Mike O'Hara, who had a Bulldog Brower fan club and a Hulk Hogan fan club. We had the international Ron Dobratz. He had the Wrestling Information Bulletin, which I'm telling you, state of the art for the time period of the early 70s. It was a magazine type format, but so much information. So that was our internet, guys. And you wanted to belong to these clubs, but the people that ran them, these are the friends I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Today, I go down my list of friends, and sadly, many have left us. But the other side of it is, I go down the list and I say, God, I've known this guy for 52 years. You guys know Scott Teal?
Yeah.
Crowbar Press. Scott Teal and I met via fan clubs and that sort of thing in 1970. And we have become longtime friends over the decades. So international wrestling was no longer international when we had the WFIA.
Cool. Jesse just loves the bulletins because they for us as history people, they just give us so much information, and I really love seeing where the guys all go. They're
This
just
is Monetary Justice Binder, buddy.
Yeah.
I love this guy. Now, March 21st, 1982, by the way. That's when he passed away.
And I was going to say it was 82. I knew it was
But,
41 years ago. 41 years
like,
ago. Very sad.
For me, being like, as I guess they would say, the modern fan, me and my buddies talk about this all the time. We're very fortunate to have the internet because now I can have access to literally anything I want.
Yeah.
So I subscribe to Fight Plus. So for $80 a year, I have access to all pro wrestling from all the states, all the indie promotions, MLW, GCW, New Japan, AEW. Like I have everything just on my computer. I always tell Wes I do respect the old school way because you had to use a typewriter.
Yeah.
You had to use a typewriter. You had to use like to put like a poster together, picture, all that, and then photocopy it.
Mm-hmm.
So the effort that had
That's
to
the
be
way I
put
did my bulletins.
the effort that had to be put in, and the communication now. It's not like I just log on to Facebook. Hey man, you got anything from this era? No, you had to write a letter, mail the letter, wait for something to come back. Like so, it's the effort. The communication was just on point. One thing you did say is wrestling magazines. I have a couple things. Wes, I'm going to skip a couple things since he brought up magazines.
Yep.
I picked out some of my magazines. George, I have so many magazines from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. I've been very fortunate to have a lot of people support my wrestling history journey. So shout out to Andrew Calvert, AC, wrote the Maple Leaf Wrestling book. He runs the Maple Leaf Wrestling website. So I pulled out some stuff here. So here's Wrestling Life, January 1961.
I have it.
Yeah, I'm just going to show quickly because we like to show history as our thing. So here's another one, 1985, Pro Wrestling Illustrated Annual.
Yep.
Good one.
I got this one here. Wrestling Main Event. These are pretty nice. February 1983.
Yep.
Yeah, they had nice color pictures in them.
Yeah, right? And I always, Wes has sent me a couple magazines as well. I got a couple. Here's Wrestling. I tried to grab a bunch of different name ones. So Wrestling Revenue. Look at Ric Flair's hair there.
Yeah.
Now that particular issue of Wrestling Review, that is the Norman Keatzer version.
Yes.
Because Wrestling Review magazine, and let me lead into this if you don't mind, Jess.
No, go ahead.
Right here, this is my pristine, perfect condition copy of the very first fall 1959 issue of Wrestling Review.
Okay.
And this was put out by Stanley Weston. He started the Wrestling Review, and he was, at the time when he started it, he was printing it 4 times a year, and then went to 6 month bi-monthly, and then eventually it was an annual publication.
Okay.
For a fan of my era, now this is in the 60s now, if you move forward.
Yep.
Wrestling Review, Wrestling World, and The Ring Wrestling were the 3 what you'd consider the premier wrestling magazines, but they were all East Coast published.
Yes.
So you noticed on the first issue, you got Eddie and Jerry Graham.
Yeah.
The Graham brothers, the Golden Grahams. And this was filled with color. They're also on the back. They're called the Stinkers on the back, Eddie and Jerry. But the reason I bring that up is that those magazines, they would have a results section in them where fans could send in results. The only thing, kind of like the internet a little bit today, is that we're not always certain that it's accurate. Because things can be, fans can stuff and put stuff on. And so what I used to do, and this is where I got crazy, is I started collecting results. I just thought results were the brainchild of the business. It was so much fun to follow a wrestler through his career. And you see when he's a baby face, you see when he's a heel, you see when he wrestled under a different name, you see when he was pushed, you see when he was a mid-card. And sometimes it'd be up and down like that for his entire career, depending on where he wrestled, what territory he was in. Maybe he had a mask on, whatever it was. And those results tell those stories for me. So what I did, our internet of the day, was I spent hours going to libraries. Do people even go to the library today? I don't know.
Mhm.
But you go to the library and you go to their microfiche, if anybody knows what that is, and you go through these machines looking for old results in towns somewhere else. Go through the old newspapers. Back in the day when newspapers were abundant, you go to a library, they'd have newspapers, all the major newspapers from all the cities. And it'd be fun to go through them and go to the sports section and find the results clipping and share those. So between that and these magazines, and you talk about something that's valuable, this magazine, brand new, which we are in September right now. This magazine went on the stands, the newsstands, about July of 1959. Okay. The fall issue is what it is, and it's the premier issue. 50 cents. That was a lot of money back in 1959. And I got this magazine because I went to the drugstore with my grandma. We went over to the drugstore. We were going to get a malt at the soda fountain. I mean, I'm talking stuff that people won't even know what they are. But on the newsstand, this was sitting there. And I picked it up. I saw the wrestling, and I had been following it. And I looked at it. I had no idea that it was the importance of a premier issue, a brand new magazine. And I said to my grandma, I said, Grandma, could I have 50 cents? In 1959, I was 7 going on 8 years old. Mm-hmm. So it tells you I'm 106 now. I asked my grandma for the 50 cents and she says, well, that's a lot of money. I said, please, can I have it? She gives me 2 quarters. I bought the magazine. Now, I've been blessed through the years because I'm one of these goofballs where I don't let anybody touch my stuff.
Yes. I
didn't let kids in school read them. I didn't let the neighbors read them. When I read them, I opened them up and never bent the binder. So I told you this is in pristine condition, and it is. And I keep it in the plastic folder. I keep all my magazines in a file cabinet in their individual thing. But today, someone wants to go on eBay or wherever. I've seen these crazy magazines sell for $200, $300, $400, $500. And I saw one time about a year and a half ago for like $800.
Wow.
Like, are you kidding me? Now, would I sell it? No.
Yeah.
It's my heart. This is cool.
Yeah.
So as old fans, that's what we did. And that was our internet. These type of magazines, and then those fan club bulletins. And then finally, I collected programs from all the different territories. And Wes, I think you heard me tell this story.
Yes.
I would buy 8 or 10 or 20 programs at our local wrestling card. Mm-hmm. They were 4-page. They were just a 2-page.
Oh yeah, I 4 Texas. I've
got all the Texas, Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, all the minor cities. I've got them all. I've got Houston since 1953 forward every week. Wow. You remember they ran every Friday night.
Yeah.
Texas did up until the mid 80s.
Houston was Paul Bosch, right?
Yeah, at the end it was Paul Bosch. Originally it was Morris Siegel.
Okay.
Go back a ways, but I've got each program they ran every Friday night, 52 weeks a year. The only time they never ran a Friday night was if it was Christmas Eve.
Okay.
If it, every so often it's going to land on Friday. And that was the only night during a year that Paul would not run a show, but he would then run a Sunday show or something around it for that particular week. But otherwise, every Friday night at the Coliseum, kids, there it is. But I'd buy these programs in Twin Cities. I live in Minnesota. So we had St. Paul and Minneapolis, the Twin Cities. They ran every other week in conjunction to each other. So I'd buy the programs. I set up these correspondence type situations. Again, coming from pen pals and things in these magazines.
Yeah.
That's how I met Scott Teal. Scott and I started trading programs back in 1969. He'd send me the Tampa, he lived in Florida at the time, and he'd send me a Tampa program, and they ran every week. Tampa, I think, ran Tuesday nights. So I'd get a Tampa program, I'd send him mine. I even worked it out with some of the promoters around the country, which is ironic because they adhered to kayfabe.
Yes.
You'd think they wouldn't want you to know what was going on. But I used to get the Lubbock, Texas programs from Nick Roberts. And Nick Roberts was a former wrestler.
Yeah.
And he promoted Lubbock, Texas. He'd send me the program, I'd send him mine. Sam Muchnick in the St. Louis office. I had a couple of different folks over the years that I would get their programs sent to me. Paul Bosch, you mentioned. Paul would send me the program, and I would send him mine. And I built up my program collection from all over the country. So that's why in today's world, I can tell you what happened. And it was always fun. I never had kayfabe broken to me by the wrestlers in the day. They still held to it. But when our announcer would come on TV and say that, one of our wrestlers is injured, going to be out of action, and I could kind of smile because I just got a program where he's main eventing in San Francisco. And it was fun. So great, just a great era. And the internet today, it's easy. I envy the young kids today and they have so much merchandise available to them today. Jesse, when you showed that Wrestling Life, that was a state-of-the-art magazine for the late 50s and 60s. And I have the whole pile of those, all the different dates. The other one was Big Time Wrestling was another one. That was a smaller magazine, more compact. But those were what we had in our day. And now today I don't even think they print magazines anymore, do they? Is Pro Wrestling Illustrated still printed?
Just released the top 500.
Yeah.
Okay, and I did hear that.
CWI 500 and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
One thing that you did mention, his name is Tom Burke. So a lot of stuff from Tom Burke. Since we're talking programs, I pulled out my files, so I'm gonna show you a couple of mine. So you might recognize these.
Yep, I got it.
1973 Andre. So I love collecting stuff with Andre on it. Some of these I've got from Wes too. This is a St. Louis one.
Yep.
And I find these are just fascinating to me. I got a Big Time Wrestling one here. Hold on, I got newspaper articles in here. I gotta put in a folder here. So this is one of my favorite ones. You'll probably have this one since you got Dallas and Texas. Big Time Wrestling, November 11, 1979. Race versus Bruiser Brody.
I've got it.
Wow, that's cool.
I got it. Right? I keep all of mine by year, all the programs by year in files. So I've got, like the Dallas section, and I got them all in file cabinets. So there isn't anything that I can just go pull out a file and if you don't mind regarding programs, I did pull something out that I was going to share with you, and I had these bound. Good Lord, I did this about 40 years ago. Our Minneapolis program was called Sports Facts. That was the name of the program. So I have from July 14th, 53 to December 27th of 55, I put them into a bound volume.
Oh, nice. Sweet.
Okay. And so, like the first, it's hard to put them on there, but this would be the first one from 53.
Wow.
And then I've got all 4 pages of the program in the,
Sweet.
in the book.
That is just gorgeous, George.
And so that was one of them that I did to kind of keep and preserve those. And this is a hardcover book with the dates on it and Sports Facts on the cover. Well, then I said, all right, I'm going to do the rest of my 50s. And I did another book from January 3rd, 56 to August 26, 58. It's a little bit bigger. But again, it's every program from Minneapolis on Tuesday nights. And so it's just the coolest thing.
Yeah, that's
the then the rest of them, I keep them from those dates. I keep them in individual files, all the programs.
Yeah.
And the sad thing, guys, is that the era that I watched wrestling, I'd go to the matches, I was lucky enough to have ringside seats. And I'd buy my 10, 12, 15, whatever the amount, it increased in time as I was getting more correspondence, to have to send out. And I'd get up after the matches were over and I'd see more programs that were wrinkled and crumpled and beer spilled on them and Coke and popcorn on them on the floor. People just leave them.
Yeah.
And they were there, but they just didn't pay attention to the program. Of course, I kept mine. When I bring my programs to my seat, I'd have them in a folder that I could keep them safe till I got home. Yeah. So I was a rare breed, just a rare breed.
Yes.
Because most people didn't save that stuff. And now we go on the Facebook wrestling pages, and I love it. Somebody will say, I think I had that program. I always just chuckle, you think, and you had two keywords. I don't think I have.
Yes.
It's like,
yeah.
So yeah, we lived in a different era and I loved it. We didn't have the merchandise that we do today, the fans today. You can buy anything wrestling related, but we had magazines, we had the programs, and we had photographs. Most wrestling territories would do 8x10 glossy promotional photos of the wrestlers. And I started sending around to all the different wrestling clubs and getting their promotional pictures. Obviously, when ours would come up with new Minneapolis Wrestling Club, when they would come out with more new ones, I'd be down there, give them to me. And again, I saved them. I have them in albums. I have I've got over 50 albums of pictures, publicity shots. And then finally, I have file cabinets with individual files with bios, pictures, clippings, whatever on each individual wrestlers. So I can go pull it out, tell you anything you want to know if I don't remember it. I've got it in the files. That's what I've done.
That's amazing.
And then if you walk into my wrestling room, bring a sandwich because it's going to be a while.
Yeah.
But I can probably spend 2 days in there.
So I have ceiling to floor, wall to wall, framed publicity pictures, posters, just all over the place.
Now I know what some of Wes' study is like the Wild Man, Dave McGinty and all that. I know that he loves the original Hollywood Blondes, as he always tells me. They're the original ones, not the ones.
Was that Tim's one of them?
Sorry?
The Hollywood Blondes you're talking about, was one of them Tim's?
Dale Roberts and
it's Dale Roberts and Jerry Brown. Okay. Yeah. Can I tell you a little story about them?
Sure.
Absolutely.
I was when Jerry Brown and Buddy Roberts, when they teamed up, I was in Oklahoma, actually in Leroy McGurk's office when he was putting Jerry Brown with Buddy Roberts.
Wow.
Bill Watts had brought Buddy in. Now, this is back in 1970. Bill Watts had brought Dale Hay, that was Buddy Roberts. He brought him in to team up with Jerry Brown, who had been teaming with Jack Donovan.
Jack Donovan, yeah.
Yeah. And so I had seen Dale Hay, obviously, in my home area here when he was getting some training from Vern Gagne. And he was coming down from Canada. He was wrestling as Buddy Smith here in the States. And then when Watts left AWA in December of '69, he went down to help Leroy, and he brought Dale Hay with him to form that Hollywood. And I was in the office when Dale Hay, now Buddy Roberts with the blonde hair, came in, and I always remember that. It was a special. So I was there at the onset.
Wow.
That's pretty amazing.
That's amazing. And they just, I love seeing them in Montreal when they just ran roughshod in Quebec.
Now they had Humperdinck with them, didn't they?
They didn't originally, but yeah, he came along not much after they started there.
And Humperdinck, there's an interesting story. John Sutton, Red Sutton, we called him. He had that red hair.
Mhm.
And he was a Minnesota boy. He used to work security or actually it wasn't security. He was an usher for the Minneapolis Boxing and Wrestling Club when they'd hold their cards here in the Twin Cities. And he had his blue usher outfit on. He would sit ringside. And invariably, every time Mad Dog Vachon wrestled, he would knock Red Sutton off his chair and he would grab that chair to go in the ring. Now, you may know, Wes, that when Mad Dog and Butcher Vachon came up to Montreal with the Grand Prix promotion, they ended up bringing Buddy Roberts and they brought in Sir Oliver Humperdinck. And that was that was Red Sutton, Sir Oliver. What a character. And I miss him dearly. We used to have lunch regularly, not regularly, often. We had lunch. We'd go to Hooters.
Oh.
in Minnesota here, there was a Hooters I think there still is, in the Mall of America. And we also went to Champs. It was a nice place to have lunch, but what a hoot that guy was. Oh my God. Just great.
Bill Alfonso and I had a good conversation about him. Bill Alfonso came to an indie promotion in Toronto, and our podcast sponsored the event. And I had like my stuff out, and he comes out. He's like, "Where'd you get all this?" It's my stuff. Like, this is what I do. This is what we do. And I swear to you, one of the nicest guys I've ever met. We talked for 2 hours. Anything he wanted to know, all the guys' names, showed me pictures on his phones, everything. He was a really cool guy.
Yeah.
What are some of your favorite wrestlers, George? I was getting to before we got into the stories. Like guys that you just had to see. Because I'm sure you remember, like you say, oh, I remember this, but there's got to be times where you're like, I remember when, like, because for me, you must have remembered when the first time you seen guys like Giant Baba, Antonio Inoki. Andre came to Canada in the late 60s, early 70s. So I mean, that was probably he went everywhere and anywhere.
I'll answer your question, but I'll start with the Andre thing for you. I saw Andre in his, when I say Minneapolis, I'm talking AWA, okay?
Yeah.
Because Minneapolis was the office. Andre appeared for the very first time in Minneapolis on July 24th, 1971, Minneapolis, and he was the surprise tag team partner for Bull Belinsky, Frank Shields. If you guys, if I don't know what, Jesse, if you know who Bull Belinsky was, he was an out of work truck driver gimmick, over the road truck driver. That was as Bull Belinsky. That was his gimmick. Long story short on that, Frank Shields had been a wrestler for about probably 10, 11, 12 years. Up and down a little bit here in some of the smaller territories, mid-card guy, good worker, maybe 5'8", built like a fire plug,
Yeah.
And in 1970, Vern Gagne brought him into the AWA. And there was, if you go back and check the news from that year, that date, 1970, there was a national truck driver, over-the-road truck drivers union strike.
Okay.
So the truck drivers were on strike. And Vern, bless his heart, he brought in Frank Shields, had him in a truck driver cap and a blue, kind of a blue work shirt and some blue jeans. And he brought him in as an out-of-work truck driver because of the strike. Now, Frank Shields comes in and he tells the announcer, Marty O'Neill, he says, I'm here because I'm an over-the-road truck driver. I'm out of work. And he says, I've been beating up bullies on the docks for years for nothing. So I'm going to wrestle and make money. Perfect gimmick.
Yeah.
And he was supposed to be a bad guy. Vern wanted him to be a heel because he's a bully. Okay.
Yeah.
But the fans start cheering him. They will not bull. They will not boo Bad Boy Belinsky. That's what he was called. Because who's going to boo a truck driver?
Yeah.
Everybody's family has an over-the-road truck driver in it. Truck drivers, they bring you your food, they bring you your bed, they bring you your everything, you know? So they were cheering him. So Vern flipped him. He became a babyface. And he got involved in a feud with Pretty Boy Larry Hennig and Luscious Lars Anderson. And they were beating up on Bull, and Bull's got to get a partner. So he tells Marty O'Neill, he says, I've got a partner. And I'm not going to tell you who he is. And Marty says, well, you got to give us some clue. I'm not going to say anything. The only thing Bull said as he walked off, he went, Ferret. Now, we didn't know what that was at the time.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I'm pronounced, that's the way he pronounced
Yeah,
it. But
that's how you say it.
and wasn't it Jean or Jean or
Yeah,
Jean Ferret? Okay.
Jean Ferret.
So that's all he said was Ferret, and he walked off. Well, then the night of the matches, Bull's got a mystery partner. And it's in the program, Bull Belinsky and question mark, you know, Andre the Giant. And it was perfect because Hennig and Anderson, they're like, no, you know, this guy's 9 feet tall. And Andre was tall and thin in those days.
Slim, yeah.
That was the night. The sideline to that, the main event on that card was scheduled to be what they were describing as the Battle of the Unbeatens. Nick Bockwinkel and Hercules Cortez. They've both been in the territory for a while. You know, they build them up as being unbeaten, good guy, bad guy. They're going to have a battle. The storyline is that one of them will get a title shot with Vern Gagne, who was the champion at the time.
Okay.
On that night, that morning of the card, early morning, that was the night that Hercules Cortez was killed in the car accident coming back from Winnipeg after they'd wrestled up in Winnipeg.
Oh, wow.
And Hercules lost control of the car. He had Red Bastien, who, by the way, they were the tag champions at the time.
Yes, that's right.
Cortez and Bastien. Bastien was in the front seat with him. Well, Cortez was killed early hours of July 24th. So Vern had the dilemma of what he's going to do because Hercules is dead. And what are we going to do? Vern agreed. Obviously, the card went on. And Vern agreed that he would, at the last minute, he said, I will wrestle Bockwinkel, but it's a non-title match because I haven't had time to prepare for this. And, you know, so he kept up. Great match. But that was really cemented. That really cemented Bockwinkel as the number one heel.
Mm-hmm.
And also on that card, which was unique, it was the AWA debut of Ray Stevens that night.
Okay.
He was scheduled to wrestle Red Bastien. So Bastien was injured. He didn't wrestle that night. They had a substitute for him on the card. It was a jobber named Jose Betancourt. Anyway, did I eat lunch today? I have no clue. See what I tell you?
Yeah.
But Ray Stevens came to ringside for the main event between Vern and Nick. Ray claimed he was coming just to scout the both of them because he's new to the territory. I want to check this out. I want to eventually have a chance at the title. So he's at ringside. Well, Vern ended up putting his sleeper hold on Nick and in the ring. Ray jumped up on the apron to inform referee Aldo Bagni, an old wrestler in his own right, that Vern had a chokehold on him. Vern let go of Nick and went over and slugged Ray, knocked him on the floor. Nick snuck up behind Vern, rolled him over in a cradle, 1, 2, 3. He got a non-title victory. That's how that all ended. So that was my first night with Andre the Giant. Aren't you glad you asked?
I love it. Like, yeah, but it's good for me. And then, like, a lot of my friends that watch the show and, like, the modern fans, we don't know any of this, right? Like it's great to learn, right? I'm gracious and very lucky that Wes took me under his wing, and Andrew Calvert has been helping guide me on the Toronto and Ontario side of things too, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I love a guy like you, Jesse, because you want to learn. You are eager to know what happened yesterday. And I love a guy like you because there are so many fans today, and I'm not putting them down because it's their product and God bless them for it.
Yeah.
But they shrug off the old school as if it didn't happen, or those guys were old, or those guys didn't, they didn't do this, they didn't do that. They don't want to know. And that bothers me. So we don't talk with that type of fan and I. We just don't talk.
Yeah.
You got your stuff, I got my stuff. We're not going to go there. But a guy like you, I'd love to sit down and we could share beer, coffee, whatever, and just have fun because you want to learn.
We Jesse pulls one out of the hat, usually one episode, every episode, and I go, oh man. I say to myself, oh, it's rubbing off. And B, I say, way to be, Jesse. You pulled that one out of the hat because believe me, George, I took mine from my good friend Terry Dart, who was that
good guy,
15 years older than I was.
Yep, good guy.
We're passing it on, and what we believe, and Jesse is the same. We believe in keeping professional wrestling history alive, and it's everything to us. And I've used this example before that golf has 1,000 books, baseball has 1,000,000 books, football has 1,000 books, blah 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 blah, and Des Moines, Iowa, nobody knows nothing about it, right? If someone doesn't jog the memory or show something every once in a while, it's gone. It's just gone. And I love doing research. I love diving deep. And yes, it's on the internet. I've done my share of library stuff. Thank you very much. But yeah, it's just we need to keep it alive.
Well, the interesting thing is, did you go ahead?
No, I was gonna say what drives me nuts too is with guys that like, oh, who cares? It's like, okay, but without Gene Kiniski wearing the Canadian jacket, Bret Hart wouldn't have carried a Canadian flag. Bret Hart says Gene Kiniski was a big influence on how he carried the Canadian pride. And for me, it's like everyone, oh, Vince exposed the business. Well, hold the phone here. Because back in, I think, like the 20s or 30s, someone exposed the business in New York and it killed wrestling in New York for years.
The thing that if you are a modern day fan, you need to realize that, and you use the Bret Hart, Gene Kiniski example, every single gimmick that wrestling has had through the decades has been stolen from somebody.
Yeah.
Or it's been used in a variation from somebody or somebody. I go back to the era after World War II, and that's kind of the dividing line, guys, because in World War II, the wrestlers that had been active in the 20s and the 30s and the first part of the 40s, they were now old.
Yeah.
They were retiring. Some of them were dying. World War II happened. After the war, some of the younger modern talent was coming around in the later 40s. That's when you had guys like Gene Kiniski and Vern Gagne and all these guys that were coming, Pat O'Connor, they were coming, they were the new baby faces.
Yeah.
And so, but there was the one guy that changed things so drastically, and people don't realize it today. Gorgeous George.
Yeah.
George Wagner. He had been around before the war. He come out and he was a mediocre wrestler. I mean, he had basic limited skills. Anybody would tell you that. He never really went up the cards at all as George Wagner. He just made some money in the business.
Yeah.
He came up with the outlandish idea to bleach his hair blonde, white, blonde hair, grew it long, had the curls. He'd go and get perms. In fact, when he would come into a town, he would go to the local beauty shop and make sure that he was seen, which in those days, trust me, this was a very, very feminine move.
Yeah.
But he'd come out with the blonde curly hair. He had the sequined robes. He would strut. He would boast that he was the toast of the coast and whatever else he could come up with.
Yeah.
He became a draw, and everybody wanted to see him. And then you had television. Now, this was the beauty of it. Today with television, I mean, my God, we got 7,000 channels and you can do anything with TV. But in those earliest years, in its infancy, television sets were small originally, and then they got a little bit bigger, but they were black and white, grainy salt pictures. They had antennas that you had to move to get the lines away from it. But wrestling, guys, that was the program that launched TV, because it was cheap to produce, and any town, any major town with a station, they would play wrestling. The Dumont Network in Chicago was at the time, a national network.
Yeah.
They put wrestling on, and they hosted the guys like Gorgeous George, Pat O'Connor, Dick the Bruiser, Lou Thez, Killer Kowalski, Yukon Eric. I think I said Vern. And those were household names around the country. Those guys traveled in those days. And then you started your territories. And when you go to 1948, 49, when that group of promoters got together to form the National Wrestling Alliance, the logic being simple, we're going to have one champion. The National Wrestling Alliance was a great idea at the time. And that's where we had the #1 alliance going through the 50s with a champion. I always tell people the NWA, National Wrestling Alliance, wasn't really a promotional at all. It wasn't really a promotion. It was a champion. It was a group of promoters. Sam Muchnick was primary in it.
Yeah.
And but Wally Carbo, our Minneapolis promoter, Tony Stecker, who was originally the Twin Cities promoter, whose brother Joe Stecker was an old 20s, 30s wrestler.
Old school guy, yeah.
Yep. And a hooker, by the way, for sure. But they formed the National Wrestling Alliance. And technically, even though there were territories all around the country that were under the NWA banner, they would recognize their own tag team champions or their own TV champions. But the National Wrestling Alliance would meet once a year, the group of promoters, they would come together and they would all vote. Who was going to be the champion? Do they stay with the present champion? Do we want to put the title on someone else? And the promoters would lobby for the guys, but that champion then would travel to all these towns. And when he came in those days, he had to be both a heel and a baby, depending on who his challenger was.
A tweener.
If he was against the #1 babyface in a town, well, Lou Thez or Pat O'Connor, Dick Hutton in the day, even Whipper Watson, Gene Kaniski, they would be the heel. Now, if they were wrestling against the mean old bully in the territory, they would come in and they could get the fans on their side to not make sure that bully didn't take the title away.
Yeah.
They told storylines. The storylines were adhered to. I think if I were to pick one thing about modern wrestling that I've seen over the last 20 years is the storylines are sometimes so complicated, and then they don't follow through on them. Something happens, they drop them, or they forget about them, or they, and good guy this week, bad guy next week, good guy that week. There's so many switches. In the old school days, it was very rare when you pulled stuff like that. And when you started a feud, a program between two wrestlers, you went the gamut.
Yeah.
Took a year to build it up each match to get to the cage match at the end, or the lumberjack match, or the Texas death match, or the loser leave town match. And I mean, whatever thing they came up with. Yeah. So wrestling was promoted a lot different.
Yes.
And Lou Thez was the kind of the flag bearer for the NWA. Got to give him credit for that. He was the go-to guy. He took it seriously. He believed the champion should wear a suit and tie and be professional. Even if he was a heel, he still adhered to that. I'm the champion. You want to look the champion.
Yeah.
Now you look at the WWE today, and I'm only going to do this for a comparison purpose. You've got champions that are tattooed all over, shaved heads, rings in their noses, and they're wearing not wrestling outfits, whatever it is. It's just not the look of a champion, but it is for today's fan. So let's be clear about that. Today's fan will accept that, and it's a different society. But in Lou Thesz's day, that was not the way you presented yourself. So Lou Thez, Whipper Watson, Dick Hutton, Pat O'Connor, Gene Kiniski, again, Lou Thez. We had Harley Race come in. We had Dory Funk Jr. They were all that way. Jack Briscoe, when you saw them outside the ring, they were in a suit. Look at any picture, they were in a suit.
Yeah.
And when the NWA would hold their annual convention, they decide how the champion is drawing around the country that they're using at the time. Do they want to keep them? Many times the champion said, I've had enough. I can't travel anymore.
Yeah, I can't do it.
Jack Briscoe was one of those. He had the title for what, 2 years, Wes?
Yeah.
Yep, 75 to 77. We're not going to give the exact dates, but 2 years. And Jack said, I can't take it. I'm on the road 400 days a year, and there's only 365 in a year.
Yeah.
And the travel schedule, they'd be in Australia one night, they'd be up in Seattle the next night, they'd be in Tennessee, they'd be in Florida. Horrific. So a lot of times the wrestlers didn't like the scheduling, and they burned themselves out.
They burned out. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of the way that went. I mean, it was, and to know about those things in the day. Do you want me to continue with something that I pulled out earlier, or should we give you guys a chance to take it?
No, keep going.
Go ahead.
Well, we mentioned Gorgeous George.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And coincidentally, I pulled this out. We know that today there is a plethora of wrestling books, wrestler books, both.
Yeah.
Over the past 25, 30 years, I mean, there's thousands. Everybody's got a book out. Everybody does a book. And many of them, most of them are really, really good.
Yeah.
There's been some ugly ones in there. But the most part, they're all really good, and I love them all. I have too many of them. They're lined up on shelves. But the reason I bring that up is because back in the kayfabe era, and you go back to the very early 70s, we didn't have wrestling books. Wrestlers didn't do books. Promoters didn't do books.
No.
There were no fans that were doing books. The only book that came out, and this was and I'm going to look at the year, but it's 1974, I'm sure. But I am going to check. Where are we? 1974. The book came out, Whatever Happened to Gorgeous George.
Yes.
By Joe Jers. And he was the wrestler's son, Frank Jers. This, honest to God, when this book came out, though he didn't break kayfabe, in a lot of ways he did for the era.
Really close.
It was on the border. And it told about pro wrestling up to 1974. The side story to this I always love is when this book came out. Now you got to remember, we didn't have online in those days. You can't go to Amazon and order the book. We didn't have a lot of bookstores where you could go and just get it. So when this book came out and I heard about it, it was getting close to Christmas in 1974. And I kind of hinted to my wife, I said, I'd love to have this book for Christmas. So I left it at that. Well, she's going all over looking for this book, and she was told there is no such book. Well, you got to remember the exact title, Whatever Happened to Gorgeous George. And what it really was is telling a story about how wrestling had changed.
Yes.
So Whatever Happened to Gorgeous George, one of the originators. She's asking the stores, I'm looking for a book on the life and times of Gorgeous George. And if she's hearing me tell this story, she's going to giggle. So there's no such book. So lo and behold, she finally figured out, and they figured out that this was the book. And I have it, and this is the original copy. And ended up I noticed this when I pulled it out, and I ended up pulling out a clipping from the newspaper
Oh, wow.
from whatever, it must have been in the 70s, and it's inside the book. Now, this was a state-of-the-art book for the time. And then for the next 2.5 decades, we don't have another wrestling book, guys. There's just no such thing. And back in 2015, I want to say. God, that's good too. 2015, Scott Teal did a revised edition working with Joe Jers to update whatever happened to Gorgeous George.
Okay.
And published it through his Crowbar Press.
Crowbar
So
Press.
I have this, and he put some really good stuff in here in addition to the original book. So now I tell people, if you're lucky enough to find this, and these guys on eBay, check them out. They're expensive.
I've seen the big back. I've never seen the big edition, George.
Now this one here sold for a whopping, it's a hardcover book. You can see that. What do we got? About 200 pages?
$2.
Well, you're not far off. What the heck? How many pages we have here? We got 187 pages, but it's a hardcover.
Yeah.
So Scott did his in a soft cover, but this book sold for a whopping $7.95.
Wow.
It's on the inside cover, which was equivalent to the 25 or 39 or whatever they charge today for books.
Yeah.
So I tell people, if you want to find a good book, if you want to really start a collection in books, pick them both up. Scott did a good job on this, and I'm sure he'll pay me a quarter for plugging it. So,
Scott,
all right, take a breath.
I'm
I'm going to take a drink. Ask me something else.
I worked on a bit of the Scott's reprint of the Wildman book with him.
Yes.
And it was great edition. Whatever happened to Gorgeous George, I haven't read paperback for, I don't know, 30 years, 40 years. I've seen it around, and I think I got it out of the library and I was going to steal it, but I couldn't bring myself to that.
You talk about Gorgeous George. I pulled this up on my phone.
Oh, the old Google thing, huh?
No, this is my boy Calvert, AC. He hooks me up all the time. So here's a picture. So
You're breaking up a little bit.
You're really echoing for some reason.
You're echoing all night.
Yeah.
Must be the Elton John shirt. So
Crocodile Rock.
for people who don't know, Cooper Watson and Gorgeous George had a famous match in Toronto where Gorgeous George lost his hair. So here's a thing from a Toronto paper he got sent. I'll try to show it the best I can.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
The bird cage protecting the hair.
Yep. That's great.
And then I have this one here that Andrew also gave me. It's just kind of the end result of him getting his hair cut.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I have that clipping.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I do. In
Yeah.
my I've got a Gorgeous George file. I have that clipping.
Real famous moment in Ontario wrestling history.
Yeah. You know, while we're talking about Gorgeous George, because he really was the pioneer of all the bleach blonde wrestlers, you know, whether it be Buddy Rogers or Ray Stevens or Johnny Valentine or Pat Patterson or whoever it was, you know, George was the innovator, the start of it. He had a sad ending to his career. He died when he was in his 40s.
Yes.
And he died on Christmas Eve of 1963. But the sad thing about George is that he was an alcoholic. He had went through some wives. He was an alcoholic, and he basically was penniless at the very end of his career. Now, there is a famous 1962 match when you talk about losing hair. George went to Dick Beyer, who was the Destroyer under the mask. With the mask. He went to Dick Beyer, and Dick was hot at the time as the Destroyer. And George went to him and asked him if Dick would do him a favor. Dick told me this story personally. And it basically was, he was down and out, he was broke, he wanted one final payday, and he could sell. He still could, his name on the marquee meant something, Gorgeous George.
Mhm.
So he went to Dick and he wanted to do a mask versus hair match. You know, what a great gimmick. And the fans were going to come to see it because, number one, they wanted to see the Destroyer unmasked because he was a hell of a heel. And they wanted to see George, embarrassed, shave off his golden locks. Well, the agreement is that Dick agreed to do it with him, and George was going to get a good payday. And of course, Dick wasn't going to take his mask off, so you know who won. And there's the picture of him shaving his head again for that. And that was kind of his last payday, and then he passed away.
That was
So
in
that
Los
ended to
Angeles,
just
right?
a great career.
Yeah.
Before we wrap things up, a couple more things I want to talk about historically, considering it's podcast day and everything. We talked about the magazines earlier, but there's one significant moment besides 1963 being a huge year for wrestling, since WWF started that year and everything. Women's wrestling. Now, I pulled out a couple magazines, premium magazines. So, women set to organize, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then I got here, U.S. Labor Department, no help to girl wrestlers. So, women's wrestling today, not to bring the modern stuff, but some of the girls are better than the guys.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
A lot, like Ric Flair's daughter is 10 out of 10. Every time she is dynamite.
I agree.
And it's just funny to me, being a modern fan, to even think that women's wrestling was banned, considering a lot of it was used for almost like a gimmick, almost like the midget wrestling was like an attraction.
Yeah.
So women's wrestling was banned in a lot of states. I think Evan Ginsberg did an article on this before, and he talked about the first women's wrestling match. I think it was in New York, the Fabulous Moolah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to know what your thoughts were, George, being a historian, being so knowledgeable about women's wrestling and the women's wrestling movement from what it was to what it is now. Because it headlined WrestleMania not too long ago.
Yeah. Here's the deal. You touched on it when you said that women's wrestling back in the day, let's use the 50s and the 60s,
Okay.
into the 70s, okay? Women's wrestling was considered more of an attraction. You said like the midgets. I don't even put them in the same class. You don't want to get me started on the midget wrestlers because I thought they were an embarrassment. Okay, I'm going to share it. I want to share this. Promoters went out of their way, just out of their way to tell fans, convince fans, the wrestlers did it to convince you that the sport was real, not fixed, not fake.
Mhm.
And then they would shoot themselves in the foot by putting a damn midget match on where two guys or tag team are in there. And it was easy for a 5-year-old to tell how choreographed it was. That used to drive me nuts. I hate midget wrestling. I'm sorry. Okay, I've said that. Now, back to the ladies. And anytime there was a midget match, I was never in my seat. I couldn't take it. Now, regarding the lady wrestlers,
Mhm.
part of the problem is that they had the same problem that the midgets had in that there were not that many of them. And the number of women's wrestlers in the 50s and the 60s, they were all usually controlled by either Moolah or one of the other lady wrestlers, and they would just rent themselves out to a territory for a month and work all the cards in the territory and then move on. And there was, the problem is that they weren't able to build storylines around them because they were just, as I said, an attraction. The lady wrestlers are on the card and they didn't mean anything to the fans. You know, you put in two ladies, you introduce them, they wrestle. And in those days, you know, the guys in the audience, they were hoping that, you know, they were going to get to see a strap loosened or something, or, you know, whatever it was. They were nothing more than eye candy. And that's the sad part of it. But when you talk about the ladies today being good wrestlers, I don't think the ladies of my era or the 50s, 60s, 70s, I don't think they get the credit they deserved, because they were wrestlers and they were good. Kay Noble, Betty Nicolai, Princess Littlecow, Fabulous Moolah, Jean Antone, Donna
Mae
Cristanello, who?
Mae Young.
Mae Young, Penny Banner, Lorraine Johnson. I mean, I can go down a list. Vivian Vachon, she kind of revitalized it for a while. And Sherry Martel came on, and then Medusa, and it just kept evolving. But these ladies, they did work their butts off. And they weren't considered, they just weren't taken seriously. It was still considered a man's sport. Yes, and they were nothing more than attraction. They were nothing more than what Andre the Giant was when he would come in and work a territory for a month. You know, in the 70s, Vince McMahon Sr., he was the one that booked Andre the Giant. And he would rent him out to promoters. Yeah. You know, I'll give you Andre for 6 weeks, and you give me 2 guys or 3 guys. That's the way they bartered. And so every territory would get Andre for, you know, 4 or 5 weeks. He'd go around and they'd have a little program with him, but then he's gone. I do want to encourage, since we were talking about books, and since I'm feeling in a good mood, because putting out a book is a tough thing. And a lot of times you don't get rich on them. I've done it. I know that. But we're talking lady wrestlers. And I want to plug this one.
Okay, yeah.
The Sisterhood of the Squared Circle, The History and Rise of Women's Wrestling by Pat LaPrade and Dan Murphy. Dan Murphy, you guys will know us from Pro Wrestling Illustrated.
Yeah.
2 great guys who do their homework, who have really researched a phenomenal story from the beginning to the end, with all of the names I mentioned, and I rattled those off, but there are tons of them in here. And speaking of Charlotte, there she is. Yeah. I just happened to flip to that page. It is a phenomenal book put out by ECW. So if you want to know about ladies wrestling, I think this is a good book to give you the story.
We're big fans of
Dan and Pat. Yeah. Remember my email and get that check sent over to me.
Yes.
I met Pat LaPrade in the summertime at an indie show.
Great guy.
Yeah, I took time to talk to me. I said, hey, man, just so you know, like, I love wrestling history. I really respect your work, all that. He's like, oh, I don't know your name. Because I don't have the credibility, but.
Well, he's a good guy. And like I say, if you're interested in, you asked about women's wrestling, I really encourage you. This is a good book. Cool. I will tell you, with the slew of books that have come down the pike, as we mentioned a bit ago, Crowbar Press, Scott Teal, I think has some of the most phenomenal books because of his dedication, his research, his commitment to excellence. His books on the wrestlers or on whatever, the territories, whatever he does, they are great. People, look at the books, order the ones you want. ECW has done a great job with all of their books.
Yes.
Because guys like Pat and Bertrand, I'm forgetting his last.
Bertrand.
Yeah, you know who I mean. Yeah. He does such a great job.
And our
so many others.
Greg Oliver.
Oh yeah, Greg Oliver. Great books. So, and then if you get really bored, that guy Shire, he has Minnesota's Golden Age of Wrestling and some record books out. So go to Amazon. But seriously, there are good books. There are some, I swear to you, there are some that I've gotten. A few times over the years, I'll clean out my books, literally, and I don't get rid of anything wrestling related, but I do on these books. I look at them and I say, this is the biggest piece of crap I've ever read. And I know there's things wrong in it. I know there are errors. I know they didn't do their homework. And while I'm at it, the latest book right now that I encourage you, there's 2 of them that if you are interested, Tim Hornbaker has the Ric Flair book out.
Yeah. Just came out.
He sent me a copy. I'm going to do a review for him. My jaw dropped. What a phenomenal history. And I really commend him for what he did. And I'll be talking about that probably on a podcast too at some point, but order the book. I'm not a Ric Flair fan. I'm going to tell you that up front. I saw him in the beginning when he started. I saw him in his first match. But,
wow.
and I followed through his career. I give him all the credit in the world. He's a phenomenal worker. He was when he worked. But I just wasn't a Ric Flair fan. But I don't take away what he brought to the business, and he was a hell of a good worker.
Yeah,
We're the fanboys of Ric Flair. He was a god.
And the other book I'm going to tell you that I'm reading right now, and I'm really enthralled with it, is Brian Solomon's Chic, Ed Farhat.
Yeah.
I don't have the name of, I don't have the book in front of me what the exact title is. It's blood and something, blood and guts.
Yeah, Blood and Fire, I think.
Yeah. Another really good book, and Brian's another reputable guy that does his homework.
And we had Brian on our podcast, George, and we talked about at length with the book.
Yeah. And I'm just starting it right now.
Oh, okay.
I'm just starting the Chic book, but I just finished Flair's. It took me longer than I wanted to because we had vacations and stuff, and I wasn't able to just sit down and read. You know, you can't do anything fun on a vacation like read. So that was a joke. Anyway.
Yes.
There we go.
Jesse, what else do you have there to take us out?
Just one small thing I want to touch. So, one shits on Vince for bringing in to wrestle.
You're breaking up again.
Oh.
You're choppy.
So Vince, he brought the celebrities. Everyone says that he's the first one to do it. But I think people forget that Muhammad Ali was in it with a no.
Mm-hmm.
Just wanted to talk quickly about that. Did you ever witness that? What did you think about Ali taking two toothless and taking on the no?
Are you asking me or Wes?
Well, both of you, I guess.
Go ahead, George.
Well, we obviously, you got to remember that was Vince Sr. that was the primary promoter of the Ali Inoki. We'll add the word debacle.
Fiasco.
It was basically what you would call the first attempt at pay-per-view. It was closed circuit television, which was kind of the coming of the new era in the mid 70s. And this took place in June of 76. Every territory had their own closed circuit event for that, where they had the Chuck Wepner versus Andre, boxer versus wrestler. Then they had the feed from Tokyo with Inoki and Ali. And then each promoter would put together their own card in whatever city they were in. So in the AWA, we got a card from Chicago that was on closed circuit, but it was a live card. I think Greg Gagne, Jim Brunzell wrestled maybe Lenz and Dunn. That one I have to think about the undercard. I was so ticked off at the actual match because for those of us that sat through it, Inoki laid on his back the entire night on the mat and was just kicking at Ali, who was, trying to go through the boxing motions. The most fun part of this show was, if there was anything, is that first of all, we had no idea that wrestling would change so drastically in the next 8, 9, 10 years with pay-per-view, cable television, and all that stuff that was just around the corner. But the events that took place for the Inoki Ali thing in Chicago, Ali worked out with two wrestlers, Buddy Wolf and Kenny J, who was one of our jobbers. Hell of a wrestler, but he was a jobber. And they were brought in to just spar with Ali. The fun part is I think this is on YouTube if you search for it, because I have seen it. Vern Gagne was acting as the second for, in fact, Dick the Bruiser was too. Vern and Bruiser were acting as the second for Inoki in this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they had Freddie Blassie involved with Inoki, or with Ali, right, Wes?
Yep.
And this was showing where they were showing these sparring things. And the actual sparring matches with Wolf and Ali and Jay and Ali, they were better than the Inoki Ali scenario. It was awful. That's all I can tell you.
We had the WWF taped Gorilla Monsoon getting in the ring with Ali.
Yes.
And that's what we saw.
Yep, that was your workout. That is true. And that's I think that's on the YouTube
That's
or
on
something
YouTube
too.
too.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that was the prelude to it. Closed circuit. It was a big deal. I think Lance and Duncombe wrestled Crusher and Bruiser on the Chicago card.
Yeah.
Without looking, I think that's what it was. And then there was a couple of preliminary matches. Greg Gagne wrestled Bob Orton Jr., who was a hell of a good worker, let me tell you.
Yeah.
Very, very good.
His son is ridiculous.
Oh,
Randy,
yeah. Randy's awesome.
one of my favorites ever. Funny story about Randy Orton. He came to Oshawa, Ontario. So that's where I'm originally from. Me and my buddy skipped school to try to meet the wrestlers all day. When Randy Orton showed up, everybody swarmed his car. Now, this is when he was a legend killer, right? And my buddy goes, "Hey, Randy, how about a handshake?" And he goes, "I don't know where your hand been." And I'm just like, old people, this way. I just like, he's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Time, for sure.
And, I had the honor, Jesse, to see Bob Orton Jr., Randy's dad, but I also had the honor to see Bob Orton Sr. wrestle. I saw him in the 60s. In the early 60s, he was a hell of a good worker at that point yet. And I saw him in Florida wrestle some matches. I don't know how long we've got, but I was told by Wes that we were going to do tonight, where we were supposed to bring or show some memorabilia, something or other that is precious to us. So I did do that. And I actually had to take this off the wall, but it's very special to me for a reason, because I think, Jesse, you were alluding to earlier if I had a favorite wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
And I have many favorites through the decades. I have two wrestlers that are number one and number two without any question. Everybody else can line up for three and go on from there. So I've got many favorites. My number one wrestler was a guy I already mentioned earlier, the Destroyer, Dick Beyer. And he was Dr. X in our AWA, in another masked persona. Nicest wrestler I ever knew. I am so proud that we became friends. He's visited, or when he was alive, he visited our house. He was very kind to me through the years. I can't say enough good things about him. And I do want to say that when I got the Historian Award at Cauliflower Alley in 2013, I had asked Dick Beyer if he would be the presenter for me, because we were allowed to ask somebody to be the presenter for the deal. And I asked Dick, and I got more choked up with his answer than I did actually receiving the award.
Okay.
When I asked Dick, I said, I was wondering if you would do the honors and be the presenter. And he put his hand on top of my hand and he said, "It would be an honor. You earned it."
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
And that got me. Well, he went up and he did that. But a little later, I saw him at an event, and he called me over to the table that he was at, and he said, come here, go over here, come behind the table. So I go to behind his table. He says, that's yours, take it. What is it? He said, take it, it's yours. And it's a clock.
Wow.
A Dr. X Destroyer clock.
Holy shit.
Okay. That he put together with not only Destroyer, but a couple of Minneapolis programs inserted in there. You'll see just the covers.
Yep.
Now, here's the fun part of the story. He gives this to me, and me being the historian and the wise ass that I am, I was flabbergasted. I said, Dick, my God, this is great. He says, well, it belongs on your wall. Okay. So I'm just excited like you wouldn't believe. And it's nicely done.
Yeah.
So I looked at him and I said, Dick, I'm going to hang it up. And I said, but, I hate to tell you this. I said, right here, I said, that's not you. He says, well, who the hell is it? I says, it's Jim Osborne. It's double X. He goes, oh, for the love of God. I never noticed that. And it is.
Okay.
And Jim Osborne was double X
Yeah.
in the Twin Cities with Dr. X. And then when Jim Osborne left, he went to Mid-South and worked for Bill Watts as Dr. X. But he's got Osborne's picture in there on his clock. He says, I never noticed it. I said, that's what makes this even more special.
Exactly.
So I hang this hangs on my wrestling room wall.
Nice.
That's a treasured thing.
That is.
And he gave this to me in 2003.
Okay.
And so, yeah, my favorite wrestler, I can't say enough about him. I loved him. I really did. Him and I would talk often on the phone, and I would always call him on his birthday. And and then every once in a while I just call. I called his house in February of the year before COVID, or 2019.
Yeah.
2019. I called him, and he was going through some heart issues and sick. And I talked with Wilma, his wife, and she said that he was not doing good. And I got off the phone with her, and I got in my car. I went to the card store, and I bought a card. Get well, sent it off to him. I dropped it in the mail. The very next day at 1:00, I had a phone message, and it was from Wilma. She says, I'm sorry to tell you, Dick passed away an hour ago.
Oh, wow.
And I don't mind telling you, of course, my card was on the way, and
Yeah.
I cried real tears. He was my friend. So that I share, that was the memorabilia I was going to share. When I look at stuff that's valuable to me, obviously all my programs, my collection, my photos, etc., and posters, but this is
That's special, George, for sure.
So there you go. And it keeps time.
I can see that.
It keeps time. I just have to remember to change the battery.
Yes.
All right. I'm done, guys.
Well,
Jesse?
Wes, I got nothing else. Do you have anything else?
I just wanted to blow this by you here, guys. And I know you've seen that before, Jesse.
Yeah.
I saw it go by. What is it?
It's
You gotta show it again.
poster for Abdullah the Butcher movie.
Oh.
That
Like,
was
when
shot-
is this?
Shot
when was this?
74, 73, shot in Calgary when he was working with Stampede.
Really? Okay. Now, see, I didn't know that.
The movie was barely even released. Barely.
Wow.
Yeah. It was luck. I was looking for a picture of my dad's friend who was an actor.
That's a great piece, though.
Well, it's been damaged, unfortunately, but it is
Well,
what it is.
It's good to have nonetheless.
Yes.
That's right.
As usual, I want to thank everybody for subscribing, liking, sharing, being good people about the whole thing, sharing wrestling history. Don't forget our Facebook groups, Tribute to the Wild Man, National Wrestling Clippings Alliance Facebook page, the Ontario Facebook page, the Ric Flair Facebook page, and the BC Facebook page. We got a couple of new wrestlers from All-Star Wrestling in Vancouver on that page now, so that's really exciting. Myself, Eric Froelich's wife today, which was super cool. She's on the page. Jesse, anything to add?
Yeah, just want to shout out to Joey War Eagle for sending you that picture.
Oh, yeah, that's amazing. I'm so happy to be part of his life. He's not a social media kind of guy. He doesn't really want to be part of anything, but he has a friend who sends us unbelievable pictures from his career. And George, it's just a local guy who worked with the Wild Man, who's very, very friendly with his collection of stuff. And we have no problem sharing it, and he likes sharing it. He says he might like to come on for a podcast and talk about the Wild Man and his career. So we'll have to wait and see if that happens.
You know, I never saw the Wild Man wrestle. I know of his career, and I've got programs and stuff that he was in and everything. The only common denominator we have, Wes, is that, you know, Adrian Adonis was killed in the same car wreck.
Yeah.
And of course, Adrian, you know, was here both as the tough guy persona, and then later on, he even came back when he was ballooned out and blonde. And
dude, Ventura and Adonis is one of my, I wish I saw them tag team.
Jesse, I'll tell you, I love tag teams. I'm a tag team. That's my favorite type of match. I always love tag teams. Yeah. And excuse me. I'll tell you about Jesse and Adrian. They weren't always my favorite team, but I loved watching them because I was always cognizant of how important each one was to the other.
Yeah.
That's the only way I can describe it. It was genius to put them together. Adrian was the wrestler. He was the bump taker. Oh my God, that guy could flop around in his day. And he was tough. And Greg Gagne, he tells me, he says, working with Adrian was it was incredible. And Jesse, on the other hand, he was as stiff as a board, and the wrestlers didn't like working with him all the time. And he was a showman. He was a strutter. He was a talker, and he drew the fans. And ironically, you know, he was the one that fans were probably coming to see more than Adrian, but Adrian. So as a team, you know, definitely if I talk about top teams, they're right up there. Mm-hmm. Very much so.
And you're a former governor too.
Well, that I would have never believed. that I would never believe. And I've met Jesse. I don't know Jesse. I mean, we don't know each other, but we've talked a couple of times. He knows me, but we don't know each other, you know, like intimately. Mm-hmm. And when I say intimately, it's like the guys that I knew where I talked to all the time. I'm not talking about any other way, guys. Not that there's anything wrong with that, whatever. Don't even get me started on that. Anyway, I'd like to ask people, if you're interested in some of the old school stuff, maybe go to my Facebook page. George Shire's Wrestling Time Machine.
Yep.
Hit the join button. And if you can show me that you're an old school fan, it only goes up to 1990, nothing after. You can show me you're an old fan and you're interested. We can talk and share lots of stuff. We can share lots of stuff. Wes, you're a member, right? You're a member of the page.
Yes.
Order my book, Minnesota's Golden Age of Wrestling. It's on Amazon.
Look at you pushing stuff.
Well, now I'm going to do one more public service announcement, then I'm done, okay? I'm going to do one more public service announcement that old school wrestling fans will appreciate it.
Go ahead.
Okay? Remember, fans, there's none genuine without Vern Gagne's picture and signature on the label. Yeah. Jarrah Speed by Vern Gagne.
And he's got a bottle of it too.
Well, and only problem is I'm afraid that if you ingested these pills, it may be equivalent to being hit with gamma rays or something.
Yes. I can't.
But that's a collectible.
Yeah.
I value that. It's a collectible.
Well, George, thanks for coming on the show, buddy. Again, appreciate it. Love talking history. We'll have to do this again.
Thank you. You
Uh,
can't guess that I like to talk.
We had technical difficulties. We had a couple other guests lined up, and we just cannot connect with them, and that's too bad because we could have had decades and decades and decades of wrestling history on the show, both with a wrestler and a historian, and then a very famous performer manager from the Detroit area. But that's cool. We're okay. We move on, we march on, we carry on. So Jesse.
Yeah, 5 Facebook groups: Ric Flair tribute page, Wildman tribute page, National Wrestling Clipping Alliance, Ontario History, BC History. We're on TikTok. We're on Twitter. Thank you to our sponsors, Grand River Tea and Grumpy Bear Vinyls. Please check us out on YouTube, NWCA Podcast. Hit that subscribe button. Our goal was to hit at least 200 by December. We're at 189. Help us get there. Our boy Daniel Dart and Johnny G working together, trying to get these episodes out. We can't, without them, we wouldn't have a show. So thank you, boys. And until next week, Toronto, I think we're doing 1959. We're talking a little Kaniski action again. So watch out for that. Check out all the other episodes. Like, comment, share. Until next time, I'm Jess.
I'm Wes.
And that's Wes wearing an Elton John shirt on a wrestling show. And we'll see you next time. Adios.
Ciao for now.
I'm Jess.
And I'm Wes.
I'm Jess.
And I'm Wes.
We are the National Wrestling Clipping Alliance. It's the NWCA Podcast. The NWCA Podcast.
I love doing this, and I love you in a, cool wrestling history kind of way.
Hey, easy, man.